We'll give a few minutes for folks to join. I'm going to give about 3 more minutes for folks to join in, and we'll get started right at 7:05. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. And this webinar is being recorded for folks who are unable to be there in person. I see some greetings from folks around. Thanks everyone for joining us on this panel on partnerships in fisheries and aquaculture today. We've been looking forward to it and have a great set of speakers and discussants today. I'll give some context for our discussion, but not before I turn it over to Mr. Emmanuel from the Committee on World Food Security for some opening remarks. Emilio, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thanks to Abby and to the organizers for the kind invitation to join this webinar today. As a member of the Secretariat of the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS, I'm delighted to be able to speak about sustainable food systems, healthy diets, the role of fisheries, and also about the need for multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral collaboration. We all know that food systems, diets, and nutrition are interconnected. Malnutrition in all its forms is a major challenge from which no country is immune. And the impacts of malnutrition in all its forms have profound consequences on people's health, on people's well-being, on physical and cognitive development, on livelihoods throughout lifetimes and also across generations. And fish and aquatic foods are major contributors to the healthy diets of billions of people. They provide micronutrients and high quality proteins that are key to healthy growth and development, especially at early stages of life. And despite the importance of small scale fisheries actors in providing livelihoods and food security and nutrition in many different contexts, they face marginalization and constraints in effectively participating in decision-making processes. And in order to address these challenges, it's crucial for countries to inclusively develop policy and institutional reforms. And these reforms have to take into account all relevant actors and sectors within the food system. So with a view to promoting sustainable food systems that are able to deliver healthy diets, that are able to improve nutrition, while at the same time protecting biodiversity and environment. As you may know, the Committee on World Food Security is an inclusive international and intergovernmental platform of the United Nations, a platform that brings together a wide range of stakeholders to discuss, negotiate and find consensus on global policy guidance concerning food security and nutrition issues. And this year in February, the CFS members have endorsed the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which are relevant for the subject of today's meeting. These voluntary guidelines have been developed through an inclusive multi-stakeholder process that was informed by the scientific evidence of a report launched in 2017 by the CFS high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition, the HLP, which is the scientific arm of CFS. And the process that led to the endorsement of the voluntary guidelines saw the active involvement of hundreds of stakeholders. We are talking about representatives from governments, from UN agencies, civil society and private sector, financial and research institutions that took part in the various preparatory meetings that were held in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in Near East, in Latin America, in North America. And the voluntary guidelines represent a concrete tool in the hands of governments, UN agencies, and other development actors that provide guidance on policies and interventions to address malnutrition in all its forms through a holistic food system perspective. A holistic perspective that considers food systems in their totality and also that looks at the multidimensional causes of malnutrition. The guidelines provide a framework that brings together the various actors that are involved in the food systems, a framework that recognizes that the various parts of the food systems are interconnected, that any decision or action concerning a specific aspect of a food system would impact other aspects of the same food system. So they recognize the importance, the guidelines recognize the importance of implementing interventions within and across food systems and their constituent elements, which are food supply chains, food environments, and consumer behaviors, in order to improve their ability to deliver healthy diets and to generate positive environmental outcomes. They aim at promoting policy coherence and at reducing policy fragmentation between relevant sectors such as health, agriculture, education, environment, gender and social protection, trade and employment, all sectors that have an impact on food security, on food systems and nutrition in this case. And at the end of the day, the intention is to support the development of coordinated multi-sectoral national policies, laws, programs, investment plans to enable healthy diets through sustainable food systems. So here we're talking about sustainable food systems, but what makes a food system sustainable? It's its ability to enable food security and nutrition for current and for future generations in accordance with the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. And in this context, the guidelines that were approved this year by the CFS recognize the fundamental role that sustainable food systems play in promoting healthy diets through sustainable production, through sustainable management and use of natural resources, and also through improved socioeconomic conditions and livelihoods. Now, coming to the point, to the relation between the guidelines and sustainable fisheries, the guidelines highlight in several parts the role of fisheries in sustainable food systems and also their contribution to the realization of the right to food. You will find in the guidelines different recommendations. So they call for interventions to facilitate the affordability and access to fish and aquatic foods, especially for the most vulnerable segments of the population. And they say that this could happen also through social protection programs, such as cash transfers and school feeding programs. And then to address their exclusion from decision-making, the guidelines recommend to provide small-scale fishers, fish workers, and also their communities with tools, including through capacity building, to effectively participate in the formulation of food system policies at global, regional, and local levels. In the guidelines also, there are various provisions that recommend to strengthen the governance of food systems, to promote the management of conflicts of interest, safeguards against power imbalances, also to promote a transparent accountability mechanism, all elements that are part of an inclusive decision-making process. So to conclude, let me highlight that the work of CFS doesn't finish with the approval of its policy products here in Rome at global level. In fact, the CFS members and stakeholders stakeholders are responsible for making sure that the policy recommendations that are adopted at global level are converted into concrete actions at regional, national, and local levels. Indeed, a full chapter of the guidelines is dedicated to their implementation. And as I mentioned earlier, the guidelines aim at promoting policy coherence and coordination, and they should be used to foster and guide an inclusive dialogue among different institutions, among different sectors, and among all those relevant affected stakeholders within the food system. So we hope that these voluntary guidelines could be a useful and relevant tool in the hands of decision makers and appropriate stakeholders to promote sustainable food systems and that deliver healthy diets. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a very productive meeting. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emilio. That was fantastic, and it's really great to have that context on the guidelines and that broader context of how we're now thinking about sustainable food systems from a really holistic perspective, and also that perspective and that framework and that these high-level policy discussions that are going on really set the stage for the need for partnerships. There's a lot of, in fisheries and aquaculture, I think as we all know, there's a lot of really exciting science coming out right now about the nutritional importance of fish, about gender in fish food systems and other aquatic food systems, about fisheries trade and value chains and their role in meeting food and nutrition security around the world. And so, and this science is also being discussed in these high level policy contexts. So right now seems like, more than ever before, an opportunity to think about moving towards impact and what types of partnerships are required to move towards impact. And, it risks sounding mundane to say that partnerships are required to, move science and policy discussions into impact on the ground. But I also think that it's something we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, or if we do, we call it a different name, right? So partnerships may kind of fall under the general idea of governance, probably, or networks, or other terms that we use to think about these relationships. But I suspect that partnerships are in fact something really unique that deserves some attention. And so I've really been looking forward to this discussion where we've set aside time to talk about what are partnerships in fisheries and aquaculture and aquatic food systems, what makes them work, what challenges do they face, and how can we enhance the role that they play in supporting sustainable, just aquatic food systems. So thank you, Emilio, for those opening remarks. And thank you also to our set of distinguished panelists that we have today. I'm going to go right into our panel discussions and give time for that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Miss Anissa Ratri, who's a master's student here at Michigan State University in the Department of Community Sustainability. And she is also associated with the National Research and Innovation Agency in Indonesia. Anissa, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. So if you will, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. So I will share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint already? Okay.
Yes, it looks great.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Bennett, and good morning, everyone from Lansing. My name is Anissa Mutiaratri, and I'm a master's student from Department Community Sustainability, Michigan State University, and I'm come from Indonesia. And in Indonesia, I'm working at the National Agency for Research and Innovation. So my presentation is about partnership to improve fishery policy based on the case study in Indonesia. So let me start with introduction. So the general topic for this discussion is to see how partnership could foster a food security in fisheries. So speaking about food security, securing tenure rights, recognition, and protection to the small-scale fishing community are crucial. However, in the context of Indonesia, those are problematic. In terms of protection, if you can see on these pictures, there are many lands or ocean grabbing projects in coastal area, for example, for mining, reclamation, and oil palm plantation project. So those projects have impact not only to the ecosystem or the food system, but also threaten the socio-economic life of fishing community. So in terms of recognition, there is a lack of recognition for women in fishery sectors. So in this presentation, I would like to bring the discussion into the partnership example that aim to improve government policy related to securing tenure right, protection, and recognition for the small-scale fishing community in Indonesia. So there are two advocacy stories that I would like to share today. So first is about land bill, and the second is about law about protection and empowerment for fisher folks. So the story is based on my previous partnership experience when I work in civil society organization, and also the partnership example from the fisherwoman organization from my thesis of research. Okay, so the first is the advocacy of the land bill. So the advocacy for this bill was under the partnership project in 2016 until 2018 called Right to Food Project. So for conducting this project, we partnered with 4 national CSO, civil society organization. Every partner had different role based on organization characteristic. For example, my organization is CSOB, the organization that focused on small-scale fishing community. So my organization was responsible to formulate recommendation related to agrarian reform in the coastal area to the land bill. So the question is Okay, so the question is, how did partnership work? So we work both in local and also national level. So at the local level, we conduct a coastal meeting, for example, to amplify community voice. And then the result from the local meeting, we formulate a policy brief, recommendation, and draft version of the land bill based on GSO. So in the national level, together with other 4 GSO, we had the dialogue with the group of parliament, presidential expert staff, and also a woman caucus in the parliament. And the end of the project, the partnership could provide material advocacy related to agrarian reform of the land bill based on coastal community perspective. The second partnership is to improve the implementation of Law Number 7, 2016 about protection and empowerment of fisher folks. So in the context of implementation, this law tends to be also problematic in terms of protecting and empowering fishers, especially fisherwomen. Even though this law is a legal basis for policy-related protection, for example, fisher insurance for fishers. However, in the reality, fisherwomen need to struggle to get recognition and also to fight to get the fisher insurance. So why the situation happen? So if the woman want to get fisher insurance, women face difficulty in order to providing some of the requirement like fisher ID, national ID card that mention they are fishers. So what the problem is, because of there is a social and cultural barrier that embedded into the woman. So to help fisherwomen, there is an organization named PPNI, the Indonesian Fisherwoman Sisterhood Group. So this organization conducted activity related to empower and also fight for the recognition for the fisherwoman in order to access the fisher insurance. So who is the PPNI? So the thing that I want to highlight is the PPNI itself was established from the solid partnership between local women groups around Indonesia Island, along with other non-governmental organizations concerned for fisherwomen in Indonesia. Okay, so related to the advocacy, what PPNI did is related to fisher insurance advocacy. Is not only in the local level, but also national level. At the local level, PPNI officer help women change their national identity card, building communication with the local fisheries agency and at the district and also provincial level. And at the national level, PPNI together with their network organization in national basis, did advocacy to the parliament, like Women Caucus, and also they have the meeting with the Ministry of Fisheries to review the substance and the content of the regulation related to the implementation for the protection regulation. So then after 2 years, PPNI finally success to foster protection and also to urge that women could access fisher insurance in the end. Not only that, so PPNI also success to influence policy. So for example, changing from fisher card that previously only male fisher can access, then into the card the card name Kusuka card that open for all actors related on the fishery sectors, not only male fishers. So then the another question for discussion is like, what kind of lesson learned that we could take from the Right to Food project and also the PPNI partnership movement to drive successful partnership. So the first aspect that I need to highlight is like having the framing issue in advocacy. So it means that having clear vision about what mistake that we want to bring into the partnership. So for example, in the PPNI movement, the framing issue is to foster recognition for fisherwomen. And then with the clear framing issue, so the PPNI success to identify what kind of partner they want to collaborate with. And then the second aspect is like performing multi-level collaboration, both local and also national level. So the important note for this is like multi-level collaboration also means giving attention to managing a resource distribution at every level, for example, like time, money, and also human resources. And also in terms of multi-level collaboration, the way we choose our partner is also important. So one of my interview with PPNI that the way they choose the partner is not only based on trajectory of the partner, but also similar value. They don't want to get partnership with organization that have affiliation with environmental destroyer or like human rights violator. So relating all multi-level collaboration, managing microstructural network is also important for this collaboration. So the third aspect is like we have the right moment, or I can say like momentum. For example, in 2016, there was the moment when the law of protection for fisher folk is enacted, and also there is a land bill was processed in the parliament. So many stakeholders pay attention for that. So I think the momentum is very crucial in the context of Indonesia, because Indonesia, we have the situation where fisheries have less attention than the issue of forestry and also agriculture. So, so we need to be aware about the momentum to influence policy in order to get more political opportunity to influence policy and also policymakers. So the last note that I would like to highlight is like some critical point that could be a barrier to the partnership related to improving policy in fisheries, such as the work culture. Different work culture could lead different performance with the partnership. So for example, like imbalance manpower, decision-making process, and also idealism in every organization. So then that could impact with the stability of the partnership. And also another aspect is like rely on the individuals. So what I mean is like when building partnership with local CSO, local fisher groups, and or local government, sometimes the effective way is like to have intensive contact individually with the contact person, like local champion, leader, and also elite in government agency. But at the same point, in some case, when individual is not in charge anymore in their group, so as the consequences, we need to like restart again and building communication and also engagement. So this situation will impact the partnership performance. So I think my time is almost end. So to conclude this, if we can define partnership as organization working together to achieve some goals. So hopefully my story from the Right to Food project and also the movement of PPNI could be the lesson learned that will add something into our bucket to drive our direction into food security issue. So because we all know securing the right, recognition, and protection are still challenge for achieving food security in the fishery sector, but the effort is still need to be continued. So partnership in advocacy could lead to fill that kind of puzzle for that. So I think that's all my presentation, Abby. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Anissa, not only for telling us about that pretty remarkable case study of partnerships, but also for drawing out those insights from your experience, which I think are probably quite relevant for a wide range of partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Arun Padayar, who is a project manager at World Fish in Odisha State, India. Dr. Padayar, please take it away.
Thank you, Abhi. Let me share my PowerPoint. Greetings to all of you. Am I audible? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Greetings to all of you from here, from India. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share our experiences on partnerships for scaling our nutrition sensitive and gender sensitive aquatic food systems in Odisha state in India. Odisha is a coastal state in eastern India, which has a population of over 43 million. 29% of children are malnourished. So reduction of undernutrition is a state priority. Government has massive supplementary nutrition program in which 4.24 million children below 6 years, pregnant and lactating women, and adolescent girls are getting benefited. Nutritious hot cooked meals are served to children on daily basis. Also, take-home ration in the form of food packets are distributed to mothers and adolescent girls. Women empowerment is another priority to the government. There is Mission Shakti movement in the state, under which 7 million women are organized under 650,000 women's self-help groups across the state for various social and economic activities, including food production and servicing the public feeding programs. Odisha has ample fisheries resources, and it is the fourth largest fish producer in the country, nearly 900,000 metric tons of fish produced. Fish is an important part of local food system. 95% of the people consume fish. Despite its great aquatic food resources, not enough nutritious fish are making to the plates of the people who need it the most, because poverty is very rampant, especially in the tribal area, which is covering around 25% of the state area. Government of Odisha, in partnership with World Fish, has started using fish as tool for fast-tracking women empowerment and for nutritional gains in the state. Carefully planned strategies such as integrating nutrition-sensitive aquatic food systems with Anganwadi, that means child care supplementary nutrition program under the state nutrition policy, and integrating gender-sensitive aquatic food systems with the Mission Shakti movement have greatly helped in accelerating and scaling the program. In a major boost to us, government has included fish-based nutrition in the state nutrition policy in 2020. Honorable Chief Minister of Odisha, you can see here, unveiled this state nutrition policy in March 2020. This has shown that there is political will and bureaucratic proactiveness in the state for implementing novel ideas that is given by scientists. For state level transformation, we have given importance to partnerships among various stakeholders: government, scientific organizations, community-based organizations, NGOs, and private sector players have worked together for achieving impacts at scale. Partnerships happen at various levels. Convergence of schemes. If you look at the government, within the government, intra-governmental things, if you see convergence of schemes among various government departments helped in leveraging the resources and unlocking the potential. 6 government line departments, including Fisheries, Agriculture, Women and Child Development, Mission Shakti, Panchayati Raj and Drinking Water, Small and Medium Scale Enterprises Department have worked together for shaping the policies and implementing the schemes. World Fish and National ICR research institutes have helped in the government by knowledge partnership. NGOs and private sector companies are roped in to provide additional support to the program, such as monitoring and evaluation, training, development of age-specific fish-based products, ideas for building supply chain and marketing, etc. Under the partnership with the government and other stakeholders, World Fish worked at multiple entry of food system from production to consumption to boost the availability, affordability, and access to aquatic foods. Under this program, 3 major activities were undertaken. Number 1, piloting inclusion of fish-based nutrition in childcare supplementary nutrition program. Number 2, promotion of nutrition-sensitive carp mola polyculture in village community tanks by women's self-help groups and in agriculture farm ponds and backyard tanks by individual households for income generation and household level consumption. Number 3, production and marketing of hygienically solar dried fish by women self-help groups in the coastal villages. In the fish nutrition pilot, 50 Anganwadi centers with 1,200 children have participated over last 6 months. Here we can see the children in an Anganwadi center in a tribal Mayurbhanj district consuming hot cooked meal blended with fish powder. In this slide, we can see take-home ration inclusive of dried fish packets distributed to pregnant and lactating mothers to Anganwadi centers. We have conducted third-party monitoring and evaluation of the pilot program through MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, which is an NGO. Based on the experiences and outcomes of this pilot, the government plans to expand the fish-based nutrition program in the state. For increasing the household availability and consumption of fish, carp mola polyculture in village water tanks is being promoted in all 30 districts of the state. In 2018, government has brought women-centric policy for long-term leasing of village water tanks to women SAGs on priority basis for fish farming. In last 4 years, more than 6,000 women SAGs involving over 60,000 women have participated in this program. In this slide, you can see the agriculture farm ponds being used for production of nutritious fish. Annually, about 10,000 agriculture farm ponds are brought under these schemes to produce nutritious fish. Hygienic fish production of, hygienic production of dried fish using low-cost solar dryers by women SAGs in coastal villages is another activity that is under progress. The product is for sales in open market, and also there is plan for supplying this dried fish and fish powder produced by women SAGs to Anganwadi supplementary nutrition program. From our experiences, we can say that partnership in the form of interdepartmental convergence schemes within the government and then knowledge partnership between the government departments and research institutions such as World Fish and national research institutes like ICR institutes. Also, strong involvement of women SAGs, which are community-based organizations, work very well and help in accelerating the activities on large-scale basis across the state. However, we felt partnership with private sector players was a bit premature at this moment during the pilot stage. And hence, no much progress was made at that. But in the process, we learned that there is a good opportunity to use the pathway of corporate social responsibility program to involve private sectors for impacts through our program. Thank you all. Over to you, Abhi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pradiyar. That was fantastic. And I especially love the distinction between speedily working partnerships and slowly working partnerships. Now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Emmanuel Konda from the World Bank Center of Excellence in Aquaculture and Fisheries at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Malawi. Dr. Konda.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. So I really want to draw the attention to partnerships from the experiences that I've had within the university, but also from the Africa Center of Excellence at Luana, Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. One of the key lessons that we have learned is that, first of all, you as an institution, you should realize the areas that you need partnerships, because obviously partnership is very important now to complement, to educate, to share knowledge, to share experiences. So we have to make a deliberate attention to say, what partnership do we want? The second process that is key is the identification of a partner. Quite often, we don't invest in identification of a partner. So the partners that we take on board should have aspects which look at their history, their objectives, their vision, their strategies, so that they are lined up with us. We had one partnership with one private sector. Obviously, that private sector had a good, different objective, which is profit making. We are aware about that. But the fact is that the partnership could not work. We were trying to produce mealworms to provide alternative protein source to reduce the intake of fish meal in our fish feeds. Beautiful idea. On paper, it was very good, brilliant. We made pitches to various support agencies. But the challenge is that we're looking at developing this technology for more or less small-scale farmers in Malawi. Our partner was looking foremost to profit making, to grow business and in developed world. So that obviously ended up when the project finished, the partnership also broke. And it's very dangerous to have partnerships that are mainly made out of a certain activity. For example, just looking for a partnership just because there's a call for a proposal or not, without looking for due respect to their objectives and aspects. So what is key, I'm trying to say here, is that the partnership should be developed by looking at our vision of our institution, the vision of the partnership that we want to develop, and where we do the synergies and the complementarity. It's very important. The other aspect which is very key is that we should have to develop, once we identify that partner, we should have developed a shared vision with our partner. And to do that, we've seen it's very critical to have contact agents within our institutions. So strong leaders that can make decisions, that can negotiate, so that there is win-win situation between our partners. We've run at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources a long partnership for almost 20 years plus or thereabouts with the University of Life Sciences in Norway. And that partnership has been built on shared understanding of what as Luana we need and what they need. And with that understanding, we've managed to leverage some support funding from Norwegian embassy, now to the tune of about $40–50 million US. Why? It's because we've had different and mutual agreements, deliberate, and we have contact persons or people who are coordinating this partnership between our institution, and they've got a coordinator in the institution who is representing those particular institutions. It's very important. The other third item that I thought is key is that we need to build institutional support commitment from these partnerships. So in each of these institutions, we need to have at a high level acceptable and also high level engagement with leaders in our institution. For example, in our case, very important that our vice chancellor or whoever is in the leader has to be in line and has to agree to that partnership, not only agree, but buy into it. And not only buy into it, but support it. So it means dissemination of our results output is key within each one of institutions. So that has been very key, especially as we have realized within the Norwegian partnership. The other one failed, as I said. The fourth item, which is key, is to ensure sustainability. Right, and I think the last speaker put it well, that some partnerships work very slowly. So we need to invest time, commitment into each partnership. It's like a marriage. So a marriage, you have to invest your time. You have to make sure that you're in compromise with your partner. So it's very important to have that sustainability, so that you make sure that it's from the start, it has to be sustainable. It can be slow growing, but at least slow growing. And that requires, as I said, institutional buy-in by the both institutions, and therefore it grows. So whether people change or people don't change, or they don't change, the partnership grows in. And that's the reason, as I said, we've managed this 20 years plus with partnership with a university in the West because of that. So always strike a win-win. We might have different cultures in each of institutions, but a compromise and a win-win situation is very important. What has made also the partnerships to break is when one partner feels that my partner is just using me for their own gain. So mutual trust is very important. I thought I could share those lessons, Abby and the team, on partnerships and how we can move partnerships in fisheries and aquaculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those insights. And I really, I think this, this dimension of temporal aspects and simply responsive versus kind of long lasting and adaptable partnerships, and speedy and quick versus slow partnerships is really useful as a framework for thinking about some of these things. Great. So next I'm going to ask Dr. Flavio Corsine, who's the Director of Partnerships at Aquaspark, to please take the floor and give us his thoughts.
Thanks, Abby, and thanks everybody, especially the previous panelists, because this is quite an interesting issue. And you know, I'm the Director of Partnerships, so I deal with partnerships all the time. But we seldom sit down and think about what are the partnerships that what makes a partnership work, and the different. I mean, we are all engaged in the day-to-day work, and then of course we use our previous learnings to get the partnerships to fruition, but it's seldom something that we really think, you know, what is a successful partnership, and I welcome this session for that. Just a couple of slides actually. So you know, I want to give two comparable examples of partnerships. Again, you know, I've been dealing with a lot of partnerships, but it's I wanted to have something that is the comparison with this. Abby gave this a bit of as a task, which was very welcome. You know, what is a successful partnership and what is a partnership that was perhaps less so. I want to focus on multi-stakeholder partnerships, one, because they are very fashionable nowadays, but also because they are more complex. So if you can make it in a multi-stakeholder setting, it's going to be easier to deal with the bilateral settings when there are just the interest of two stakeholders on the table. And I want to be comparable, because if you compare something happening in one country, in one species, and then something different in a different species, different geography, you have so many complexities. So I went back to some work that I did in Vietnam. One is some work that I did in the development of standards for Pangasius, which then became the Aquaculture Stewardship Council standards. And second is some other work that I did in Vietnam, which was through a public-private partnership focused on sustainable aquaculture, so broader than Pangasius. And just to be a bit of context, so the Pangasius Aquaculture Dialogue was really, the objective was to develop standards. So very content dense, a lot of opinions around what should be included and what should not be there, a lot of details on that value should be higher or lower. So there was a lot of technical conversation there, and a lot of interest, different interests. So the stakeholders were really industry, from farmers to feed manufacturers to producers, the packers, so the processors, to buyers, distributors, retail. So really the complexity of the industry, but also government, local government, national government, non-profits, local non-profits, international non-profits, research institutions, a lot of local research institutions. And it was a very large group. I mean, it was a stable group, or a reasonably stable group of more than 100 people who met in person therefore, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of, and you had to come up with the standards out of that process. So the process that we followed was, it started with a very top-down, if I might say, like a steering committee. We elect a group, that group decides, and that they provide a product for consultation, and then that is the standard. And we saw that other similar type of mechanisms were not really as successful in terms of they were coming up with a product, but was a challenged product. And people say, well, that does not represent the views of the smallholders of Indonesia and India, or the larger scale producers of Ecuador, all those type of things. So, and we moved towards having a process group, so a group that was leading the process, and a plenary, which was more of a democratic process. And that actually was successful, because what we ended up having the standards, agreed set of standards, which were being in use since. I mean, now they are revising in, of course, as part of the consultation process, but the standards were developed at speed. So we took only a couple of years to come up with standards that were agreed by the whole industry, international and local. And the stakeholders, I mean, everybody was reasonably happy, because they agreed on the process, and the final result was something that actually made sense to them. The public-private partnership for aquaculture in Vietnam, so same country, slightly, but also pangasius, but possibly shrimp as well, had an objective that was a bit broader, which was improve the sustainability of the aquaculture industry. Then you can define sustainability, and you can define what are the targets and so on. The stakeholders were actually quite similar. You had the government in a leadership position, because it was public and private. You had non-profits, but you had a lot of industry associations there. The exporter association, the producer association, not really the producers themselves, the companies themselves. It was a small group, and was quite focused. I mean, we are talking about, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 people. Okay, so it's really, you might assume that actually that works better, because it's easier to find agreement in a smaller group. And the process was really, you discuss and you agree what needs to be done, and everybody is assigned roles and responsibilities. So in theory, actually should be quite simple and quite successful as a partnership. But it had mixed results. And then maybe after I left, things are flying and everything is good, because this is a stable structure there. But in my experience, was a very activity focused. What are you gonna do, and what do I do? Separate activities. So I report to you what I'm doing, and I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And then, so really blocks of activities. Then for the things that were the big things to fix, became a wish list. We should do that when we have funds. We should do this other thing when the right conditions happen, when the market asks for it, and stuff like that. And I question whether we had the right stakeholders, because we had the representatives of industry and not the guys doing really the job. So some learnings similar to what was mentioned before, a little bit different, arguably. So to have concrete, clear, measurable objectives, something that is really, this is success, this is the end point. And then you might move and do additional things, but having a very clear, sustainable aquaculture to general. We improve with now what exactly we want this partnership to succeed at. The stakeholders should be the right stakeholders with the shared goals, shared vision was mentioned before as well, with the right level of power, decision making. It doesn't need to be the minister, it doesn't need to be but it can't be the head of department. It has to be the right level that can take the decisions. If you are talking with the government, if you're talking with the company, it has to be the guy that actually implemented the things that need to happen, and so on. And having a large number is not an issue as long as it's structured properly with a proper process. We need to agree on the process before agreeing on the content, because when the conversation on content starts, then everybody has their own agenda. So, but if you say, listen, before we even start talking about any of that, how do we take decisions? What is going to be the way in which we measure success? What happens if X, Y, and Z comes up? So that then people think in a more abstract way, and then they can dig into the context, and that fixes quite a lot of problems. But of course, you need also clear action plan, not just this is going to be the process, but really how do you monitor also the progress. And some other things, I mean, you need the partnership drivers or owners. Not everybody needs to be an owner and really a driver, but you need a couple of people that really have ownership and they do the real work of keeping everybody still engaged. Can be one good facilitator or can be a bunch of people that are basically owning the process. The politics are unavoidable. You always have politics, you always have agendas, but often they can be navigated. You can, if you set up the framework properly, you can move around those politics to reach the objective, if the objective is clear and if there is a shared vision for that. So it fits the needs of the stakeholders at the table. And we need to understand in advance what are the drivers, what are the things that scare the stakeholders. So, you know, thinking about reputational risk, thinking about financial returns. I mean, those are the key things that we have seen as being driving the stakeholders to engage and to participate in the process. Just some thoughts, and I welcome the next steps as well, because I think this is an important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. And I think a lot of parallels to Prof. Konda's suggestions, although from a very different context and different types of partnerships. So I think very insightful. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Simon Bush, who's a professor at Wageningen University. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but why don't you take it away now?
No problem. Thanks, Abby. And thanks to everyone. I assume you can see my slides there as well. So what I want to do is take the discussion a little bit to an academic perspective. I am an academic, professor of environmental policy at Wageningen University, nearly good, Abby, and really talking about a very specific set of experiences I have around academic private sector partnerships. Also following Abby's guidance in terms of looking at a more successful and a less successful example of those. So, putting this in a bit of context, what we see, and I'm speaking in this case from the Netherlands where I'm based, but I know this is a common theme running through a number of countries. I want to put this in the context of changing funding requirements. Well, I initially put shifting or changing funding requirements. Actually, on reflection, they've been here for quite some time already and you have quite some experience with them. But it is an important context. And within this country that I'm in, it's really framed around this notion of top sector policy. So the Netherlands really looking to enhance the collaboration. They call it the Dutch diamond, the link between academia, the private sector, civil society, and of course the state, in really trying to come with models of partnership that can lead to impact. And that's in the context of academic research, guided through funding requirements and very specifically, a lot of attention given to cash and in-kind funding, anywhere between 15 to 20%. So it's not the major funding requirements which are coming through state funding. It's not that they're looking for the majority coming from the private sector, but they are looking for a good component of the funding coming from the private sector. And private there could be indeed NGO or companies, in fact. And as I said, the goal of this, as we can all guess, I'm sure, first is valorization, ensuring that the knowledge that we're creating in academic institutions has meaning for society, put very broadly. And of course, impact, that it really does create a means by which private actors, societal actors can indeed further their own ambitions for impact. And that may indeed be partially commercial, but of course also put in the broader food system context that we've heard already this afternoon, making sure that we are contributing to whatever the goal there might be, nutrition, livelihoods, or even environment. So indeed, going to an experience which is, let's say, more positive and less positive, I'll try and draw out some lessons. A more positive example that we were involved with was setting up a traceability system for small-scale tuna fishermen in Indonesia, in the east of Indonesia. There we were working with, actually a number of private companies in Indonesia, a US-based company, a couple of US-based companies in the end, but starting off with one and their suppliers across eastern Indonesia, and that was actually mediated. We started off working with the company, but it ended up being mediated through an NGO that was a spin-off of the company, and that NGO is called MDPI. The idea there was to develop a whole bunch of technologies. You can see on the slide there a bunch of technologies that would enable greater monitoring of very small vessels on the water, as well as trying to create digital infrastructure around the value chain, from landings and processing, all the way through indeed to buyers and ultimately consumers in the US and also with an aspiration in Europe. There were lots of different ways in which we engage with this. I think it's important, I think that's one of my first points, it was a success to the extent that we were able to develop a lot of academic insights into how value chains worked, how tuna value chains worked. We were very much able to develop nice insights into what are the ways in which digital technologies intervene in the everyday practices of fishing, both on the water, on the shore, in processing companies. I think this was actually quite novel work in many respects. And we're able to do that through what I've called a series of scaled interactions. So working with, in the first instance, MSc projects, student projects, and PhDs, and postdocs, and even staff as well, sometimes even professors. Now, what is this scaled interaction about? I think the important issue there is really the time frames at which we were working. Master's programs tend to be a lot faster. They can be either a thesis or an internship, so there's a product which comes out of that engagement within a matter of months. So there we could keep the relationship, let's say, fresh, continue to be fresh and working on real aspects, or let's say aspects which were very contemporary for our private sector partners. The PhDs, of course, take a bit of a longer trajectory, more fundamental, of course, in their research focus, and postdocs were a little bit able to move between more fundamental research, but also, of course, managing the relationship on shorter term. Now, this issue of time, I think, was really fundamental. It's very difficult, in fact, as academic researchers to turn up somewhere and say, okay, we're going to do research with you and we're going to deliver something next month. That's just not really how academic research mostly works. There's a series of different timescales, and making that very explicit from the start in this particular case, I think, was very important, part of our success. Now, it's not to say there weren't trial and error along the way. There was a lot of trial and error, and there were some parts of, let's say, the value chain that we were really unable to have any sort of impact or really engage with, and that was mostly our buyers. We created all sorts of our buyers, the buyers of the private sector. So there we have supermarkets in the US, in Australia also, who essentially, well, because of the way they were buying, their buying behavior around these traceable products, they were continually undermining a lot of the work that we were doing. That reflected directly on our relationship with the people in Indonesia, and that created all sorts of issues. So there's some elements of these private sector, let's say, partnerships that we were just simply unable to maintain a degree of control over, and were very influential in ultimately the relationships we had with people on the ground. Now, I think an important aspect of this particular project is that the material outcome, the traceability system itself, wasn't actually, and it might sound strange, wasn't really our research goal. It was the applied goal of the partnership, but it wasn't the research goal. Our research goal, as I've already said, was to explore various aspects of the system that was being set up. And that was an important factor, I think, from the academic side. And lastly, this output was ultimately made pre-competitive. Now, what I mean by that is that we're able to negotiate with our existing partners, and also because we had our NGO mediator, to be able to scale this beyond a single private sector actor or a narrow group of actors. That was always a very highly negotiated process all the way along, is to ensure that whatever findings that we had, both academic but also applied, would be able to be scaled. And we're only able to do that after quite a few years, in fact, of engagement. And now we see some of the findings more indirectly than directly, in some instances being transferred to places like Thailand through a whole network of actors that can be traced back in some degree to the work we started in Indonesia. Now, again, it's still a reasonably successful project academically, but not so successful in terms of partnerships and private sector partnerships, with some work we've done in recent years on developing area-based forms of aquaculture governance in Southeast Asia, working across Thailand, Vietnam, and China. And there, what we were trying to do is work with a number of private sector actors, with buyers, with insurance companies, with finance companies, also with some of the, not companies but some of the NGO partners, including some standard organizations, to work with develop different risk transfer models. Now, our initial intention and that was agreed upon by the various partners we had, was to follow their development of area-based aquaculture forms of management, and that we would then piggyback on that work. That would be the partnership, and we would then research it along the way. That didn't work out for very good reasons, but it didn't work out. Even though there were expectations there, the timelines associated with all of those partners, getting them all in one line, proved to be simply too difficult. Now, we may call that rather naive on our side, and perhaps even naive on the side of the partners. I don't think it was. There were a range of different factors that fed into, let's say, this divergence that we eventually saw in the project. But it didn't mean we couldn't still do research. We still had a network there that was set up. We could still work with a number of partners to find case studies that we could research. And what we see there is essentially falling back on that sort of network notion of a partnership. And then ultimately what we're doing there is feeding our results back into, again, a series of ongoing activities around area-based, the various ways of calling it, but area-based management, which NGOs, civil society actors, more or less, are taking up with their private sector partners in the long term. So again, we're coming back to that same notion of NGO, civil society mediation. So moving forward, what are some of the sort of insights that I've gained from these two examples and a number of other examples? Well, first of all, there's this model that I sometimes call the Trojan horse model of academic research. The Trojan horse model, in fact, of academic private partnerships. And that can be illustrated on the right there as academics coming in, saying we're going to work together, getting the private sector to set things up or to put forward their activities as they normally would, and we will just research and produce papers along the way. That's ultimately what happens a lot of the time from the academic side. I don't think it's a very fulfilling approach. It doesn't really lead to that valorization and impact outcome that we're looking for. But of course, our incentives ultimately are related to things like publishing papers. So there is an important, let's say, discussion around what are the mutual benefits that can come from these different sectors, academia, and let's call it the private sector. Something which came out of those two examples, I hope everyone heard, was this notion of intermediation. So really not working directly and only directly with our private sector partners, but working through, for want of a better term, third parties. So we work with NGOs, we work with industry associations. These are organizations which tend to have a longer trajectory, a longer work plan, a longer time frame within which they want to achieve their goals. Indeed, even industry associations. Currently, we're setting something up in the Netherlands, indeed, with the mussel sector, for example, and we see immediate engagement with the work we want to do because they have that longer term planning and they're able to mediate those different time scales that the private sector and indeed academics have. That's been a very positive experience in my experience. Linking to that third point, indeed, scaling expectations and timelines is really key. And whether that can be done through different forms of research, indeed the MSc, PhD, postdoc model or something else, I think is also very key, again, based on my experience. And lastly, academic and applied outputs, I think ultimately do require pre-competitive agreements. Now, whether that can come directly with private sector actors or indeed, again, through a third party like an industry association is an open question. But if you want those findings scaled, then I think it's an important thing. That doesn't mean that we can't support commercialization, but I ultimately think the challenges that we've heard also today, the challenges that ultimately we face in, let's say, the food system, do need to be scalable, and that should be upfront agreed upon with any partners, again, based on my experience. So very finally, I just throwing this as a bit of a thought piece. We are subject, and this is something which I come back to quite a lot in my work in these projects, also in discussion with some of our funders. There's a lot of attention to the way that academics and academic researchers should do our research, the way we should behave, the code of conduct through which we should behave, also in the context of maintaining our integrity with private sector and our partnerships with private sector. But I've been advocating for quite some years that I also think there's some learning to do on the other side, that the private sector often doesn't really know what to do with academics and academic research, what those timescales are, what are your incentives for doing this in the first place, what are our mutually shared responsibilities in ensuring that these are ultimately pre-competitive and scalable. And there I've been advocating, and maybe we can pick that up in the discussion for, again, for want of a better term, something along the lines perhaps of a code of conduct or guidelines for the private sector, how they should engage with indeed academic research. So some food for thought, I hope. I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bush. I mean, some really interesting thoughts about possible ways to address these issues of different objectives and different institutional incentives that different partners face in a partnership and come to the table with, which I think is definitely a theme that's emerging here. So now I want to turn it over to our final panelist, Dr. Javier Basurto, who's an associate professor at the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. Javier, please take it away.
Thank you, Avi. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I assume you can see my screen and you can hear me fine. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to present a couple of examples of partnerships I've been involved with, also from an academic perspective. One is a project that is still in process and in progress. And so I have less things to say about that project because we haven't had an opportunity to, as a team, to reflect on some of the challenges. And but I have a couple of points to make there. And then I'll switch to another partnership in Mexico, where I conduct most of my empirical work. That is a longer term partnership that has given me an opportunity to reflect on some of the challenges and opportunities that have resulted from this partnership. So the first one is what you can read in the screen. Maybe you have heard of it, Illumining Hidden Harvests, which is a partnership between World Fish, my university, and the FAO to try to produce a body of work on the contributions of small-scale fisheries to sustainable development. Not only the contributions, but also the impacts. And the motivation is to make the case for investment to small-scale fisheries by governments. And part of the objective here is to produce a methodology that values small-scale fisheries not only for the catch they produce, but for all the other relationships or interlinked relationships with other dimensions of small-scale fishing, such as their economic contributions, their environmental contributions, looking at nutrition, governance, and gendered dimensions of small-scale fisheries. So we endeavored to see, okay, if we want to understand small-scale fisheries differently, governments need to collect data about small-scale fisheries that is not only focused on catch or fishing effort, and therefore, how will we do that? And so, based also on the challenge that there's not a lot of data of small-scale fisheries, or the data that is already available as secondary sources. So how do we go about doing this with secondary sources of data? So we've been working on this for the last 3 years. And we wanted to also engage with countries, national experts, to find those rich secondary sources of data. So we were able, with funding from NORAD and CIDA and the Oak Foundation, we were able to collect or engage with national experts in 58 countries, which we then were able to compile, data for more than 2,000 small-scale fisheries, for an estimated global coverage of 70% of the global catch for marine, less so for inland. And so initially, when I first signed up for the project, the idea was to make it much smaller. The idea was to work with less countries, but the project grew, and the challenges of making this happen also became a moving target, if you will. So one of the things that I want to emphasize was, how did we go about engaging with national experts? Because the national experts are really the ones that know the nuances, or they knew the nuances about the quality of the data, about what kind of data was available, whether there was data available but about catch, but not about the economic aspect, or sometimes we were needed to make connections between experts that knew about fisheries, experts that knew about nutrition, but both hadn't talked to each other. So one of the roles that our FAO colleagues played was to make those connections sometimes, because at an international level, they will knew who were the experts, but at the national level, as I say, the fisheries expert hadn't interacted with the nutrition expert or the governance expert. So that was a useful element of having a partnership with FAO. At the university level, in our team at Duke, one of the big roles we had was to screen all this data that is coming. And so it became a conversation with national teams, as opposed to just give us the data, we'll analyze. It became really an exercise on co-production. In this example, the Gabon team, will come and submit the data from Gabon, and we will go back with questions. And well, what does this mean? Why there's no data about this? And so it helped us understand the challenges they were facing. And instead of as I say, become a conversation that sometimes went for a couple of months. And so in that way, we were able to start understanding what are some of the main barriers that countries face in the production of some kinds of data. It was a process of building trust among national teams and the partnership, the project. So the goal of the project started to shift to understand barriers and opportunities for the production and the capacities at national level for the production of small-scale fisheries data in an interdisciplinary way. And that has been one of the most satisfying elements of the project, which was also key to allow us to finalize the data collection. So some of the highlights so far was, at the end of the day, we involved with more than, with almost 600 country experts when, you take into account the entire team of people that sometimes ranged from 2 people to 11, 15 experts that were involved in teams. We have also been able to produce new empirical information about the contributions and impacts of small-scale fisheries in an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way, and start envisioning a methodology that can be deployed in countries to change the way small-scale fisheries data is collected, if at all, or to start collecting small-scale fisheries or disaggregated fisheries data that is better tailored to the needs and of small-scale fisheries. And FAO has plans to, in the next stages, to start working with countries to facilitate adoption. I just want to say that we're going to present the results of this project in a November 23rd webinar. Stay tuned, and the official launch of key messages and policy recommendations is going to be next year. So moving on to Mexico, to an experience of a partnership that has it's been going on for more than 5 years, is what we call the National Diagnostic of Fishing Organizations. In Mexico, fishers organized in cooperatives, and we wanted to understand, as academics, why some fishing organizations work with others. But in fact, through the work we have done in communities in Mexico for the last 15 years, we were able to develop trust eventually with leaders, fishing leaders in Mexico. And we got together along with a couple of non-governmental organizations to develop this partnership. So on the sector, it was the National Confederation of Fishing Cooperatives, which represents around 11,000 fishers in Mexico. And they wanted to partner with us because they wanted to understand how to better serve their member organizations, fishing cooperatives. Well, a confederation is an association of federations, and a federation is an association of cooperatives. And so they were interested to understand, what they need to provide to the weakest cooperatives. How could they do better to help them? The couple of NGOs that partnered, their goals, their motivations were to change governance of small-scale fisheries in Mexico. develop a program to strengthen fishing cooperatives. And us as academics, our goal was to understand why some organizations work better than others and develop theory. So one aspect that made this project work was that everybody in a meeting, in one of the first meetings, laid their motivations to engage very clearly. And that was very helpful to develop trust and long-lasting relationship. We continue to work together. So this was a real exercise in the co-production of the project from the beginning. Not only we worked together to develop the research questions, but the methodology as well. So in the picture, you can see leaders of federations working with our NGO partners and students in the team to develop which questions to put in a questionnaire to ask cooperatives, fishing cooperatives around the country, what elements inside your cooperative are important to account for a well-working cooperative. So it was a mix of knowledge from leaders in the sector and theoretical knowledge. Then we went around the country to sample around 200 cooperatives, which, as you can see there, roughly accounts for 6% of the universe of cooperatives in Mexico. But the way we decided to sample was influenced by the advice of fishers. If we would have sampled in a way that academics sample, the project would have been much more expensive. Fisher said, no, we're gonna, you're gonna select 6 or a number of regions in the country, and we're gonna call meetings for fishers to come to these regions. And so the NGOs help us to deal with the logistics of how you bring fishers to one particular place for 2 or 3 days, so you can interview them, survey them. And so these meetings, for instance, this is one in one region in Tonalá, Chiapas, in the south of Mexico, were a mix of political meeting and research sampling meeting, where here you can see in the picture the leaders of the Confederation explaining, what these presidents and members of the cooperative are doing there, giving them their own vision of the importance of the project. And also taking the opportunity to talk about other issues. So this way, the leaders of the Confederation showed presence in these places, which was very useful for them. And then we will go and work with fishers, deploying our methodology. And so we learned a number of things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the results of the project, but just to show you that we were able to identify different levels of capacity within the country of fishing cooperatives, which you can see there as level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 being the highest degree of functionality of a fishing cooperative. And we were also able to distinguish which are the capacity elements that distinguish level 1 from cooperatives in level 1 from cooperatives in level 2. And cooperatives in level 2 from not being able to reach level 3, and so on. And so this became a very concrete way of speaking also about how to move forward. The way we decided to present results was also had a lot of feedback from fishers, the leaders of the Confederation, because they help us visualize what messages will be understood in the sector and what messages were really too academic-y for them to be effective. And so we presented some of these findings in the General Assembly of the Fishing Confederation, also with fishing leaders, then the National Fisheries Commissioner. And from this step, then we have continued to work to transform those findings to a national program of strengthening of fishing organizations. This is in Spanish, where the idea is to now have this academic study become the basis of a national program that is part of the activities that the federal government does in Mexico to strengthen fishing organizations. And right now we are in the process of designing a pilot to try these interventions in 5 or 6 cooperatives in Mexico. So with that, I'll stop, and hopefully this was useful.
Yeah, thanks. Very useful and really a really rich example of working with industry partners at a pretty impressive national scale. So really cool. That was our final panelist, and I'd like to thank one more time all of our panelists. This has been a really rich collection of examples and insight that I think, on the one hand, emphasize that partnerships are really critical in getting a lot of this really important work done in the world, but also highlight that not all partnerships are successful and that all partnerships face substantial challenges, right? And I think we got some really great insight from diverse kinds of partnerships from many regions around the world on what considerations are important for making partnerships work and what are the types of challenges that they face. And for that really rich insight, I want to thank again the panel and really remarkable panelists that have joined us today and put time into giving their thoughts to this discussion. What I'd like to do moving into the future is draw on this foundation to develop a framework for thinking about how to improve partnerships in fisheries and aquaculture, and especially in the context of the new food systems guidelines and other of these kind of high level policy and development discussions that are going on. So with that, I'd also like to thank the MSU College of Agriculture and Natural Resources for putting on this webinar, and Dr. Kareem Meridia for helping support its organization and conception. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over for a couple final remarks. First to Dr. Kelly Millenbaugh, who's the interim dean for the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources at MSU, to give a few remarks. Kelly, are you online?
I am. Good morning, Abby. Good morning, everybody, and good evening for those who are not in the Eastern time zone. It's been really interesting for me just to listen to all of this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be kind of lurking in the background, listening to all the amazing work that folks are doing. So in closing this symposium, we would like to recognize an individual whose outstanding work in innovating partnerships has positively impacted fisheries around the world and the people who depend on them. And I am very honored to acknowledge Dr. William Taylor, who is a University Distinguished Professor of Global Fisheries Systems in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, the College of Ag and Natural Resources at Michigan State University. Bill began his career studying fisheries ecology and population dynamics in freshwater systems in New York State. But his career has been characterized by an ever-expanding vision for fisheries sustainability, with his focus moving from local to national and international levels, and from fish to habitat to the people who enjoy and depend on them. His innovative and visionary approach to creating and fomenting partnerships has allowed him to put this holistic systems perspective into action throughout his career and to support countless others along the way. I want to give 4 examples of the partnerships that Bill has created and supported throughout his career, although there are many more. As a faculty member in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife myself, it has been a privilege and an honor to be a part of watching all of the things that Bill has been a part of. First, the Partnership for Ecosystem Research and Management, or PERM. Bill and John Robertson from the Department of Natural Resources, Michigan Department of Natural Resources, developed PERM, a long-standing partnership between Michigan State University, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, or GLFC. This partnership directly supports faculty salaries and streamlines the processes for the DNR and the GLFC to fund high-priority projects, ensuring that the DNR and the GLFC have access to cutting-edge knowledge and experience of leading scientists on issues related to fish, wildlife, and natural resources. It also directly supports graduate student research, creating a pipeline of individuals who can conduct and use the type of applied research that these agencies need to make decisions. Second, the NASA MSU Professional Enhancement Awards Program. This awards program was established in 1998's International Landscape Ecology Conference, hosted by Bill and Dr. Jack Lew at MSU, in partnership with the International Association for Landscape Ecology. Since that time, it has supported more than 440 students from 170 universities worldwide. Many of the former attendees are now, many of the former awardees are now leaders in the landscape ecology community. Third, the National Fish Habitat Partnership, a new successfully executed fishery management program of national importance. In 2004, the National Fish Habitat Initiative, currently the National Fish Habitat Partnership, or NFHP, was established to conserve, restore, and enhance fish habitats in inland and marine waters of the United States through a national scale, non-regulatory, and partnership-driven effort. Bill was a member of the ad hoc group who helped to clarify the need, and he served on the NFHP board from its inception until 2012. While many individuals deserve credit for supporting and furthering NFHP, Bill's long-term and multifaceted role in this national program speaks to his skills and interest in working with multiple stakeholders and to his profession and personal commitment to conserving fish and fisheries throughout the nation. And finally, the MOU between Michigan State University and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO. In 2014, Bill and others developed a partnership between Michigan State University and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization that has given a voice to global inland fisheries. Working with FAO staff, he was one of the lead organizers in a global conference, Freshwater, Fish, and Futures, convened at the FAO headquarters in Rome. This global conference led to the Rome Declaration, 10 Steps to Responsible Inland Fisheries, that has been adopted in principle by FAO's Committee on Fisheries and has been widely cited in the international scientific literature. Bill's deep dedication to science, his knowledge of people, his support of young scientists, and his collegial manner have helped form partnerships and other collaborations around the world. Bill has a unique gift for identifying critical needs as an opportunity to create partnerships, and for recognizing the right people to bring to the table and leveraging the resources to do so. Each of the partnerships just mentioned above are innovative in their form, purpose, and function, but they are united by their impact in giving voice to those who have been left out. From the world's understudied inland fisheries, the people who depend on them, and the promising young scholars inspired to study them. So Bill, I know you're on this call. With this certificate, which we will get to you on campus shortly, we would like to thank you for your service, not just to the university community, but to the global community for whom fisheries are the center of their lives and their livelihoods. Could you all please join me in congratulating Bill Taylor for this recognition?
Thanks very much, Dr. Millenbaugh, and thanks, Bill, for your service. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Doug Buehler, who's the director of the Michigan State University Ag Bio Research and Assistant Vice President of Research and Innovation at MSU. Doug, will you please wrap up this great webinar with some closing remarks?
Well, thank you and congratulations, Bill. Just a few comments, and I want to say with this many speakers, you did a fantastic job of staying on time, and so I will be very brief here to keep us within a minute or two of the target time. I'm probably the only one on here that doesn't work directly in fisheries, but in my work, a big part of my job is to help build teams and help bring people together. And one of the things that we've been trying to do here at MSU is to really recognize the incredible value and the importance of fisheries and overall food security. It's something that's a really big deal for us here. But I believe that this piece and what we talked about this morning is something that's been under-recognized in the big picture. And hopefully this is another step in really integrating that type of work. And I'm certainly committed to that in my work of helping to build teams and bring people together. And the final comment I want to make, and it was a theme that ran through from the beginning to the end, was the partnership word. And my job really is dealing with partnerships, whether it's local, state, national, or international. That's basically what I seem to do pretty much all day, most days. But I heard some really important words here that are important because we've heard some examples of some really outstanding long-term partnerships. And when you look at those partnerships, some of the words that I heard that I scratched down as I was listening, things like diverse and real, patience, compromise, long-term. That's, I think, really, and I think one of the reference was, it's like a marriage or a partnership. Everything isn't going to go perfectly every day. We're not all going to get what we want every day. But if we keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak, that there's something bigger than any of us or our personal agendas, we can really make progress, because these are big problems and we can't solve them alone, or we would have solved them a long time ago. So I think, to me, that was really just such a wonderful theme that ran through here. And all of us keep that in mind, particularly on days when things don't seem to be going so well, that it is a long-term project, and it always will be. And again, we have to keep at it because there's really no other choice. So Abby, thanks to you and your work in pulling this together. This has been a wonderful way to start the day. And thanks again for the opportunity to make a few comments and to be able to listen in. So Abby, back to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Buehler, and a great way to close a fantastic webinar. And thanks again to all the panelists and everyone who was online listening. I hope to follow up soon and continue these discussions into the future. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Abby. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.